Welcome, everybody. Good Shabbat. Wishing you a very happy weekend to come. Today, we continue our discussion of the book of Isaiah. This is part 5 of a series. Let's dive right into it. So, we come to a very interesting part in the history of Judaism. You may remember from last week that we talked a little bit about Sheol. If you remember that picture of Sheol, and of course, you can go back to that video on Facebook or on YouTube, the world is in different layers in the worldview or the thought, the cosmogony of ancient Judaism. So here's the earth, and here's the sky, and underneath the earth is Sheol, which is basically where all souls go after death, prior to Isaiah. And around the sky, the earth, and the underworld is this cosmic ocean of water. And that was what the world was thought to be. That was what the cosmos was thought to be at that point in time. Not that they didn't believe there are other planets out there, but that's how they envisioned the Earth. And beyond this idea of the Earth and the underworld surrounded by cosmic waters, beyond that were the heavenly spheres, or the olamim, or the eons in Greek. At that point in time, when people died, there was not necessarily a heaven. God was in the heavens with his angels, and all human souls after death, whether good, bad, or indifferent, went to Sheol. Later on, as I think I discussed last week, I believe it's in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel says that there are different layers in Sheol. There are different tiers of Sheol for people of different levels of behavior, whether that be people that are more developed, like the prophet Samuel, for example, is said to have gone to Sheol, and also for people that are of lower level, less spiritually mature, that have different levels or severity of sin accumulated. But essentially, back in the day, prior to Isaiah, God was in heaven with angels. Humans did not go to heaven to be with God after death, which maybe seem quite strange to Judeo-Christian faithful people of this day and age, but it just didn't happen. People didn't go after death to an afterlife to be with God. They went to Sheol, which was a very nondescript place of shadows, so to speak. And Ezekiel claimed that there were different tiers for people of different temperaments and behaviors while they lived. So Isaiah is the first of the prophets to make a divine ascent. He ascended to heaven in some way or form. And this is what became the beginning of ideas like Merkaba mysticism, or the divine ascent on the chariot throne to the highest heaven where God's throne was at. And it's apparent here in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, that Isaiah made this divine ascent. So let's read about this divine ascent. Isaiah being the first to make an ascent consciously to heaven to experience God. And God is the king, the queen of everything, right? So prophets are thought to ascend to heaven to receive a proclamation to give to the people of Israel. And that's the whole idea of being a prophet. Every prophet makes some sort of communion with God in which they are a channel of God's message for the Jewish people, usually to encourage people to come back to God, to make a return to God. You've not been doing the commandments, you've not been following Torah, you've gone a different direction, in some different direction, and now the prophets are saying, hey, we need to get our act together. We need to make a return to God. We need to repent in some way and come back and rethink our lives and adjust our lives so that we prioritize the teachings of God found in Torah. So prophets communed with God in some way, and beginning with Isaiah, as Isaiah is the first book of the prophetic literature, he made a divine ascent to the throne of God, and he saw God. and he received a message to bring back to the Jewish people. And it was not a bright message by any means, at least not at this point in Isaiah. Later on, it becomes a little bit more light at the end of the tunnel for the Jewish people, but here, God is still very mad. So let's examine Isaiah 6, 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here I am. Send me. So there's some very interesting things here. We already covered the fact that Isaiah seems to be the first one to make a divine ascent, a Merkabah ascent on a chariot throne to God. This chariot throne is better described in Ezekiel, and it's assumed for Isaiah. So in the year of King Uzziah, he had this divine vision, this divine ascent to the throne of God. In Isaiah literature that's apocryphal, Isaiah speaks of 7 olamim, or 7 heavenly spheres. And the 7th sphere is where God's throne is at. And this is the more popular of olamim schemes, or heavenly sphere schemes. But basically, the fact that Isaiah saw God in his throne implies that he made a divine ascent to the 7th heaven. In the books of Enoch, the intertestamental literature of Enoch, Enoch has a different subdivision of the heaven, and he gives 10 olamim, or eons, or heavenly spheres. And in the 10th heaven, in the Enochian scheme, that is where the throne of God is at. So the fact that Isaiah saw the throne of God meant that he made a conscious divine ascent in spirit to the throne of God to receive a proclamation, to receive a message to give to the people of Israel. Seraphs were surrounding God. They were above him, it says, and they had 6 wings, which is really interesting. I remember this whenever the bishop that ordained me, Bishop Kaiser, taught a class on seraphim, and I thought it was really interesting. So here we see a little face of a seraph, and it says here in Isaiah that 2 of the wings covered the face of the seraph. Even though we see the seraph here, you can go online and find versions where the wings cover the face. And that's a sign of humility, right? That you're going to cover your face before God. And then 2 wings covered their feet, and 2 wings they used to fly. And apparently it's a euphemism that the sexual organs are the feet, is a euphemism that Bishop Kaiser taught in this class that I found very interesting. So not only are they humble and covering their face before God, but they're also covering their more earthly parts. So in this part, we see that in many works of ancient Judaism and medieval Judaism, etc., we see that angels are androgynous, but here to cover their feet means they are covering their genitals, which is interesting, I thought. Uh, a sign of purity, a sign of covering or sublimating lower energies seems to be what the message is, with the two wings covering their feet or their private parts. Uh, One of the seraphs called out to another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." This was a major shift also. Not only did somebody go to heaven to have a vision of God, which had never happened before, but here the seraphs are saying that God is in everything, which is very different because God was believed to be transcendent or beyond his creation. He was beyond the creation of earth, beyond the cosmic ocean that surrounded the sky, the earth, and the underworld. So God was believed to be in heaven and not necessarily on earth. And in many passages, in Sheol is said to be a separation from God, a clear separation from God. Although there is one verse, again, I believe it's in Ezekiel, I could be wrong, where it says that even God's presence is also in Sheol. But before that verse was released, Sheol was a place of separation. God was not there. And in Christian theology and doctrine, we also hear about the absence of God, that God is in heaven and we can't see God because God is consciousness. God doesn't have an anthropomorphic form. So there's a sense of the absence of God. But here, the angels are saying there is no absence of God because God is holy and the whole earth is full of his glory, not just heaven, but the earth and the underworld. All of it is full of God's glory. God is present everywhere. And that was a major shift in theology and Judaic belief that began here with Isaiah. So Isaiah was very humble. He said, "I'm a man of unclean lips and I come from an unclean people. So woe is me that I'm in front of you right now." And the seraph comes and touches his lips with a hot coal that was heated with fire, the element of purification. And he symbolically touched Isaiah's lips in this vision of this divine ascent, purifying him of all sin so that he may interact with God. So very interesting. And the Lord, that is God, Yahweh, said, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? Who will send a heavenly message from me and my angels down to earth?" And Isaiah, after his purification, said, "Here I am. Send me." Here to the left, we see a picture of the seraph with tongs holding the coal, and he's keeping Isaiah's head still as he goes to purify his lips with the coal. So a very beautiful depiction of Isaiah being purified. So now God tells Isaiah about the condition of Israel, people of Israel. Isaiah in 6:9-10 says, "And he, God, said, Go and say to this people, keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull and stop their ears and shut their eyes so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and comprehend with their minds and turn to be healed." So in the prior classes that we've already covered, uh, God was taking back all support from the vast majority of the people of Israel. Uh, the idea was that people had turned away from God. They were rebellious children. They weren't fulfilling the commandments of God as enumerated in the Torah. So God took away all support and he allowed other nations to defeat Israel as a punishment. So here, God is further condemning the people of Israel, the Jewish people, through Isaiah, saying, I curse these people that they listen, but they don't comprehend the Torah or any message you might give. And I'm going to stop their ears so they can't hear any spiritual message. I'm going to close their eyes so they can't see any spiritual message. And he said, I'm doing all of this. I'm making them deaf and blind, essentially, to spiritual truths. And this is so that they can't be healed. So at this point, God is kind of cursing the majority of Israel and saying, I'm done with them. I'm done with them. Let them know I'm done with them. And that's a really harsh thing, right? And I'm not going to revisit what I've already talked about in prior classes about my personal feelings on God not being a loving God. Maybe this was just tough love or something. And we may get into some ideas like that later on in the book of Isaiah when the light at the end of the tunnel comes. But at this point, God is angry and he's saying that basically he's done with the vast majority of Israel. I'm taking away the grace that it takes for people to recognize spiritual truth and act on it. And that's a very big punishment. So you may have found that this verse was very familiar, and it's true because Jesus quotes this verse from Isaiah in all four canonical gospels. Jesus is depicted as quoting Isaiah 6:9 in some way. So let's start off with Mark. Mark 4:11 through 12. To you has been given the secret of the kingdom of God. But for those outside, everything comes in parables, in order that they may indeed look, but not perceive, and may indeed listen, but not understand, so that they may not turn again and be forgiven. Something very similar to what we just read in Isaiah. Only in Isaiah it says, so they should not turn again and be healed. Healed and forgiveness are the same thing. To be forgiven is a type of spiritual healing. So, same thing said differently. And in none of these versions of Jesus quoting Isaiah does he quote Isaiah exactly. But most spiritual teachers, including lowly me, whenever we're paraphrasing parts of the Bible, we paraphrase, we don't say it exactly. So, in all four of these renditions, Jesus doesn't give an exact quote, but something that is very reminiscent of the quote from Isaiah that we just read. So here, what they're not understanding, what they're not able to see or they're not able to hear is Jesus's teachings. Because a lot of Jesus's teachings, especially about the Malkuth of God, the kingship of God, were cloaked in parables. And he taught these parables to the public. And then he taught the inner meaning of those parables about how to attain the Malkuth of God in our hearts, the rulership of God within our hearts. He taught that in private. So here, as we spoke about, there's a certain term for those few people of Israel that God thought were holy, those that were like fatted lambs amongst ruin, as we read last week. It's called the Holy Remnant. So here, Christianity is taking over the idea of a holy remnant, that Jesus was not openly teaching to all of Israel, but just to the holy remnant. So that's the idea here, is that those that would hear Isaiah's message and understand it would only be the holy remnant of Israel, those few that were actually doing the commandments of God. Here in Mark 4:11 through 12, we see that Jesus is preaching to a select group of people. Only a select group of people could understand what the secrets of the Malkuth were, because they were framed or hidden or obscured within parables. So that's why people could not see or hear or understand Jesus's teachings, is because they were in parables. Luke and Matthew give the same reason for people not being able to see or hear or understand Jesus's teachings in this case. Luke 8:10 says, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the Malkuth of God, the kingship of God, not kingdom. Malkuth means kingship, rulership, sovereignty. And the teachings of Jesus were meant for his disciples to attain the rulership of God within their hearts. the inner guidance of God within their hearts. He said, no, not lo here, not lo there, but the Malkuth of God is within you. Meaning it wasn't some outer kingdom that was to appear, but it was rulership. So in Hebrew, Malkuth, the word wrongly translated as kingdom, as we've taught many classes, but I'm assuming some people may be brand new and show up to this class as their first class. The word kingdom is totally wrong. The Hebrew Aramaic word is Malkuth. And when you look this up in a book like Strong's Dictionary in Hebrew, you'll see that yes, it can mean kingdom, but it also means kingship or rulership or reign of God. So the secrets that Jesus taught and obscured within parables for some sort of spiritual elite, some kind of remnant of Israel, because Jesus came to teach Israel. Paul and Peter later on opened those teachings to Gentiles or nations outside of Israel. That's what Gentiles mean. Gentile nations are nations outside of Israel. So again, it's not a kingdom. Even Jesus said it wasn't an outer kingdom. He said, lo, not here, not there, but the Malkuth is within you. Meaning that within our hearts, when we fulfill the teachings of Jesus and we understand the teachings of Jesus, it purifies our hearts. And in that purification, that intimate love between soul and God that creates divine union, we attain the rulership of God in our heart. God rules our hearts. And that rulership also implies being guided by God, being guided by God's wisdom through spiritual intuitions as to which path is best to take at any particular time. However, most people, except for a select few, apparently, according to Mark, Luke, and Matthew, most people could not understand these teachings. And if you can't understand it, you can't apply it. So here, just as Isaiah's teachings were only fully understood by the holy remnant of his time, there was a certain holy remnant in Jesus's time much later in history, in Jewish history. And only certain people were spiritually receptive enough to understand the teaching. So, and if you don't understand it, you can't have spiritual rebirth into the communion of saints, into the Son of Mankind collective Messiah. So the reason, once more, in Luke, that they can't look and they can't perceive, they can't listen and they can't understand, is because they didn't know how to break the cipher, so to speak, of Jesus's parables. Matthew 13:11 through 17 gives the most information of the four accounts of Jesus quoting Isaiah. Jesus answered, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, the Malkuth of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing, they do not perceive, and hearing, they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, you will indeed listen, but never understand, and you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they might not look with their eyes, and listen with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly, I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. So there's a lot more teaching here in Matthew, and we'll keep it simple. But the same basic idea is here. The reason why people can't hear or understand the message of Jesus is because the secrets, the Malkuth that Jesus teaches, are cloaked within parables. And the reason why Jesus spoke in parables was to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah, that only a special remnant of Israel would make a return to God. So this is for special people that are able to understand Jesus or to be close enough to him to be in his inner circle where he tells the inner meanings. So for to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. So for those who have fulfilled the teachings of Torah, more will be given. But from those who have nothing, those who have not followed the commandments in my personal halakha, my teachings, even the blessings potentially available from potentially doing those things, doing the commandments of God in the Torah, and doing the halakha of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, even the potential grace of that will be taken away. But blessed are you, these special hearers of Jesus, this type of holy remnant, this echo of the book of Isaiah's holy remnant. Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. And many prophets and righteous people long to hear and see what you're learning spiritually. So the root of Mark, Luke, and Matthew is the same. They have the same basic understanding, even though Matthew expands the teaching quite a bit. The idea is that the reason why people can't understand the full message of Jesus is because he hides the inner meaning on how to attain the Malkuth of God, the kingship of God within your heart, in the form of parables. John has a very different reason for why people are blinded and why people can't see spiritual truth. So, very different reason. Although he, Jesus, had performed so many signs in their presence, they did not believe in him. This was to fulfill the word spoken by the prophet Isaiah. Lord, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? And so they could not believe Isaiah, because Isaiah also said, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so that they might not look with their eyes and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. So the reason here why, again, this is absolutely not correct. If you go back to the very first class we had in the book of Isaiah, we stressed one important point. The prophecies of any prophet are for the people of his time, not for a future time. So the prophet always prophesies for those people that are listening to him or her at that point in history. All of Isaiah's prophecies were for the people of his time. Here, the writers of John say that the prophecy of Isaiah is filled in Jesus in a future time. And the reason why God blinded their eyes, hardened their hearts, and forced them not to understand anything that Jesus said was because they didn't believe in Jesus. This is a much later dogmatic interpretation. John was written much later, I believe between 90 AD and 120 AD, much later than Mark, Luke, and Matthew. John was made to create an ecclesiastical calendar. It was the first book in which Jesus was divinized, made equal to God. So here, the reason Jesus becomes a fulfillment of this prophecy of Isaiah, which is just absolutely not correct. Isaiah was prophesying for the people of his time, not for the people of Jesus's time. And his prophecy was not about Jesus or about people not believing in Jesus. His prophecy was for people that had turned away from Torah and weren't fulfilling the commandments of Torah. And nowhere in the Torah does it say believe in Jesus. Some people might argue against that statement that I've just made, but I would challenge them and you to continue watching this whole series over the next few months of Fridays that we give classes. Every single cherry-picked phrase from Isaiah almost always is meant to prove that Jesus is something. Trust me, Jesus was divine and he stands on his own. He is a son of God. He is a fully spiritually regenerated divine Messiah. But all the phrases that were cherry picked from Isaiah to prove Jesus is something special beyond the potential of any human being is just indoctrination and dogma. Most of them are non-historical. And people may argue with me on this too, but no version of this is historical. No version is historical, right? Any spiritual teacher that comes to the planet wants to teach people. They want people to understand the path to God. Jesus would not hide things from people. The purpose of his parables were so that people could remember. If you read any of Jesus's parables, they were just very normal, everyday situations that people could understand. And they were meant to teach the relationship between an individualized soul and God. And most of the parables were about how to attain the rulership of God in your heart, how to make yourself right with God so that you can become spiritually rebirthed into the Son of Man collective Messiah. Trust me, Jesus wanted us to understand. And when Jesus taught those parables, believe me, he or his apostles expanded upon those teachings. They would teach them what it meant. And whenever people went home, they'd remember that very earthy, everyday kitchen sink teaching of the parable, right? Things that they would be familiar with in their time. I don't believe Jesus hid anything from people. Now, are there certain things that are more evolved? Yes, there are certain things that any spiritual teacher will have teachings for the masses, and there will also be teachings for those that prove themselves dedicated. In other words, people that show up. In this day and age, people would be able to receive more inner teachings if they showed up to church or they showed up to Shabbat. But as you can see, very few people come. So how are those people worthy of the mysteries, the ratzim, the secrets of the Malkuth? None. But it's not that Jesus was trying to hide them. Jesus may have obscured and protected some teachings, held back some teachings until he saw that people were dedicated. And that's true of every spiritual teacher. But to make it seem like there's a special few, that there's only a few out there, a holy remnant, that Jesus would only teach those people and everybody else is kind of accursed and will never understand the big picture. That's just not historical. And definitely John is, if Mark, Luke, and Matthew are historical, John is not historical, because John is directly saying that this prophecy of Isaiah is about Jesus, and that's just not true. Again, a prophet prophesies for the people of his time, for the benefit of the people of his time, not the people way down the road, a couple centuries down the road. So I hope this has been helpful. And every time that Jesus seems to quote Isaiah, or the writers of a particular gospel try to give a proof text about Jesus, about the life of Jesus through Isaiah, we'll examine what Isaiah truly meant. So that will be times when we digress from the book of Isaiah to examine how the gospel writers tried to appropriate Isaiah in budding Christianity. So let's conclude the Holy Remnant. What would be of the people of Israel? Isaiah is really concerned because, remember, in the last phrases of the book of Isaiah that we covered today, God cut off the vast majority of Israel and just says, I'm done with them. Anything beneficial I have to say for Israel, The vast majority of Israel will not understand because they are rebellious children. I'm no longer supporting them. They're done. I've cut them off. So Isaiah protests on behalf of these people. Isaiah in 6:11-13 says, Then I, Isaiah, said, How long, O Lord? How long will these people of Israel be cut off from understanding your divine message, from being close to you? And he, Yahweh, said, Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate, until the Lord sends everyone far away, vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land. Even if a tenth part remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains standing when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. So basically, the grace of God is being withheld until all the people that have rebelled against God are exterminated or sent into exile, put outside of Israel, enslaved, or sent out of their own homeland. Seems pretty harsh. And if even a tenth of these people, these rebellious children, remain in it, God's going to let it be burnt down again. In other words, he wants to destroy those rebellious children. And my ideas about this were very firm. Again, I personally don't believe God would do such a violent action. But I'm not going to get into that again. Please watch the earlier videos in this series in the playlist. But the belief here is that God is going to expunge from Israel all people that were rebellious children that didn't do the commandments, until the holy seed, the holy remnant, those few special innocent people that have followed Torah to a T, they are the holy seed, and it's its stump, this very bottom base part of the tree. So all that's left, Israel is a tree, and God has cut away all but the stump, the root, which is the holy remnant that actually follows the commandments of God. So until the rebellious children are totally expunged, totally destroyed, God is withholding his grace from Israel. And remember, this was, again, I'm not going to go into great detail because I've already ranted about this quite a bit. I don't believe that God would be so cruel to his children. John says God is love. Does this sound like a loving God? Jesus stresses the forgiveness, the mercy of God. Does this sound like a forgiving or merciful God? Absolutely not. But again, the reason why this idea is being developed by Isaiah and by the subsequent school of Isaiah, meaning the disciples of Isaiah and the disciples of Isaiah, they had to think of a reason. If God is almighty, as we've already said, and God is the God of Israel, how could Israel fall? They had to have a reason why Israel would fall to neighboring nations. And the reason that was developed was that, well, the people of Israel, the vast majority of Israel, must have turned away from the way of God. They weren't doing the commandments. They're worshiping other gods, whatever else they might want to develop or bring up. And God had to punish them. So in the first chapters of Isaiah, as you might remember, God was not just the God of Israel anymore. He became the God of all nations, which wasn't the case originally. Yahweh was the God of Israel, and there were gods for other countries. The ancient Jews were not monotheistic at all. Have no other gods before me doesn't mean that there aren't any other gods. It means that there are other gods and you need to worship Yahweh and not those other gods. So there were national gods. All the neighboring countries of Israel had a god or gods. They were all polytheistic, honestly, and so was early Judaism. I mean, the Elohim, the gods, created Adam. Read Genesis and understand it. They believed in multiple gods. But Yahweh was the God that we worship. We didn't worship all those other gods. So if Yahweh is the Almighty God of Israel, how could Israel fall? And Isaiah made another first statement, as we already discussed in earlier classes. Isaiah said that God is not just the God of Israel, but he's the God of all nations. And because the people of Israel have turned away from God, they become rebellious. God has permitted the other nations to come and rape, pillage, and murder, exile, enslave, expunge the Jews, all except for a very small portion, this holy remnant. That's what we're talking about. What do you think about this? Put it in the comments. Let's finish with a second cup of blessing. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother of the universe, forgive any of the mistakes I may have in my teaching. One thing I do know to be true is that if we don't follow the teachings, we put our own barrier between you and I. You don't turn away from us, we turn away from you when we don't do the teachings of Torah, the teachings of Jesus, which is his interpretation for fulfilling Torah in our lives. Help us to do our best to fulfill the teachings of Mar Yeshua, that we may become spiritually regenerated, loving children, guided from within our hearts by your Malkuth. May we never tire of seeking you until we find you. Amen. 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 Thank you, everybody, for coming today and being part of this Shabbat service, the sacrament of Shabbat. And thank you to all that listen after the fact in your own time zones in your part of the world. You're very much a part of this holy church, whether you're able to come in person or whether you listen afterwards and interact online and through email. We love all of you. Thank you so much for coming. Good Shabbat, and we'll continue our discussion next Friday. So come join us or watch the video afterward on Facebook or on YouTube. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.